since we're on Africa, you tweeted, the only thing worse than the U.S. ignoring you is the U.S. paying very close attention. This is related to Africa. Can you explain that? Because I just love that tweet, and I wanted to talk about that.
Well, yeah, I started out by saying my thoughts and prayers are with Africa and Africans, because the Africa is the future trope has become widely recognized as a reality in Washington, D.C. And tongue in cheek, I mean, the U.S. has a lot to offer, but the U.S., and I don't want to be too, I don't want to generalize too much and be too critical or harsh. I think the U.S. foreign policy establishment, both within government and in the Washington, D.C. ecosystem, really does see the world through a U.S.-centric prism in ways that reduce the world to U.S. interests. And so it's kind of similar to what I just said about strategic competition with China in Africa. When the U.S. starts paying too close attention, again, that whole hammer and nails thing, we start looking for nails everywhere. And Africa is such a diverse continent, with so many different economies and different regions, different political cultures, that any attempt to generalize is bound for failure. The good thing is that the Biden administration has one of the top Africa analysts as the Africa point person on the National Security Council, whose name I want to say Judd Devermont, but I often confuse his last name, so I might have to sneak off to Google his last name. And one of the things that he worked on when he was still with, I believe, CSIS, was city-to-city partnerships with Africa. So I don't want to be too overly critical, but again, when you project outward 50 years from now, in terms of demographics, there's everyone knows Europe, Asia, the US, a little less because of immigration, but we'll see how that goes, are going to be aging societies, where they're going to be smaller and smaller active workforces, trying to support larger and larger retired workforces of elders who are living longer and longer, with healthcare becoming better and better, but more and more expensive. It's not a great recipe for sustainable economic development in the West, at a time when the world is becoming more competitive, right? So, and what do we have? We have Europe just doing everything it can to shut down immigration from Africa. We have the US doing the same for South America, for Latin America, and Africans that are trying to come through the Americas now to the US, which is a relatively new phenomenon. And so I think there are two things going on. One is, I think there's going to be a real rethinking of that a generation from now, and a real competition for African immigrants, but not just African immigrants, immigrants from Africa, but not just from Africa. But in the meantime, I think that again, African countries are going to start leveraging that and other things to their advantage. And we've seen a start of that with the Loss and Damage Fund that came out of the COP27 climate change conference in Egypt, where there was a very clear balance of power that tilted against the US and Europe in ways that made it untenable to hold out against those payments. Now, they were framed as something other than reparations in order to avoid any legal responsibility. But that kind of wealth transfer, the door has been open to that. And I think we're going to see more of that. We have an article lined up for today on a similar movement for reparations for slavery and colonization by Mohammed El-Naim. And that argues that kind of global fund to transfer wealth, even if it's not as reparations, is where we'll see that movement go in the future, with probably more practical results. So I think that Africa stands to benefit from all of that. It stands to be the worst victim of climate change. But if there is a real meaningful wealth transfer of wealth and technology to for loss and damage, but also for mitigation and adaptation, it stands to benefit from that. And other transfers of wealth and other shifts in the global economy. So I think saying, I think that Africa has a real strong hand to play to mitigate against the typical U.S. approach in engaging with Africa that might otherwise be, like I said, cause for concern in that post on Twitter. But I think that Africa has a real strong hand to play, and now it remains to be seen whether it will play it. But I do think that Africa and the developing world in general has a very strong hand to play.